Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know how busy your days all are. We really appreciate you taking the time. And if something comes up and you have to drop off, no worries. We'll be sending out the recording afterward, so you can look out for that. I'm so excited to welcome Bridget Johnson on this webinar with us. I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to work with her these past couple months, and I can't wait to share what we've been working on with you all. So we'll start with some intros, then we'll talk about why this work matters and why this is something we've been working on, and then dive into a demo where we'll show you how all of this comes together in the platform. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bridget to introduce herself.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. As Victoria said, I'm Bridget Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of the Dean's Roundtable. And the Dean's Roundtable was created back in 2012. I was a dean of students, and it was my first leadership position. I just wasn't sure. I was like, is this job hard, or is it me, or is it a combination? And I felt like there wasn't a ton of support specifically for deans of students. So I got together with a couple of my colleagues, and we decided to create the conference, the Dean's Roundtable. And the first year we had 40 people show up. So we felt like, all right, there is a need out there. And so fast forward to about 2022, my two colleagues who I worked with went on to be heads of school, and I decided that that's not the lane that I wanted to be in, and really wanted to lean into what I like to call student life professionals. So supporting those folks who work with students outside the classroom, whether it's deans of students, class deans, director of residential life, director of student life, director of activities, you get the picture. And so really supporting those folks who can sometimes be one-of-one on their campuses. And so providing professional development, providing one-on-one coaching, but also providing resources and community is what I do best. So happy to be here with August. This tool is amazing, and so can't wait to dive in.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I'm Victoria. I'm the product manager here at August Schools. I get to spend my days talking to counselors, deans, nurses, directors of well-being, basically anyone who supports a student to really understand what we can build to make your life easier and to help you support your students. So for the past couple months, we've been really focused on building tools for school leadership. So divisional heads, principals, deans, which is why we've been so lucky to get to work so closely with Bridget. And I see that we have a mix of, on this webinar, we have a mix of schools who currently use the August platform, as well as those who may not be as familiar with what we do. So I'll go ahead and start with a bit of background on what is August Schools and what we do here. So about 5 years ago, our founders were talking to school counselors and realized that no one had ever really built software for school counselors. And I love to share this story from when our CEO was first talking to a counselor. And this counselor shared that she kept her notes in a paper notebook. And at the end of the year, she would rip out all the pages and make a little pile for each student. And that's when it sort of, clicked that she was trying to build a system of records so that she could track how a student was doing over time. And since then, in the past 5 years, we've expanded to also serve school nurses, learning specialists, athletic trainers, school leadership. I like to think of it as anyone who supports the student's well-being. That's who we serve. So what started, 5 years ago as a simple documentation platform has now become a comprehensive student well-being tool that allows everyone on the team to collaborate and understand patterns, trends, and really gain deeper insight into how their students are doing. So all that brings us to here that in the past couple months, we've been really excited about bringing behavior into the well-being picture in August. And just really thinking about, when a student acts up in class, there's always something deeper going on. And seeing how schools are shifting to more restorative approaches to behavior made it really clear how interconnected behavior is with counseling, learning support, and all the other student support structures. So that's how we started working with Bridget. We were looking for someone who had a really deep understanding of these day-to-day student life and behavior workflows to guide the product we were developing and make sure that this is something that fits really seamlessly into your existing work. So Bridget had been seeing the same things we were seeing, but just from a different angle. Schools were trying to move toward more restorative, student-centered approaches, but they were being held back by systems that were, either disconnected, inconsistent, or just built for a more traditional discipline model. And no one had ever really built a tool specifically for school leaders. And so it was this perfect fit, bringing together Bridget's experience working directly with school leaders and our work building the systems that support that work day to day. So that's really what led to this collaboration and to the tool that we ended up building. So with that, I'll pass it to Bridget to talk a little bit more about why this documentation piece matters so much.
Yes, thanks so much, Victoria. And I think if you agree, I think we should just go ahead and put the slides up, Victoria. You think it's time for that? So, do you want? Thank you. Yep. So, so we do. I have agree. I agree with everything that Victoria said in terms of what we're seeing in schools and how important it is, even more so now. I think in terms of documentation and consistency. Fragmented systems happen when and inconsistent responses to behavior happen when there's not clear documentation and clear process, and so that also leads to gaps in student support as well. So we want to make sure that when we are thinking about student life holistically, that we're putting these systems and processes in place so that the students are having a really consistent and a supportive experience on their school campuses. So we do want to spend a little bit of time talking about why documentation matters, because I think in theory we know, but sometimes in practice, like, maybe I don't need to do it, or worried about kind of the legal implications and those sorts of things. And so trying to be kind of judicious about how we are documenting things. But I do want to spend a little bit of time today just talking about documentation. And so, it's not just about compliance. It really is scaffolding for student support. And so what happens when there's inconsistent documentation is that students fall through the cracks, repeated cycles of intervention without real progress because no one really knows what the other folks are doing. It could be inactionable or reactive responses instead of really being intentional about kind of how you're responding to students. And then also just when we think about inconsistent processes, that can really open schools up to liability. So one of the things I tell schools all the time is like, the reason why people get sued in schools in general is really because you deviated from your process or you don't really have a process at all. And so people feel like they're being treated differently than someone else on the school campus. And so you really want to think about how you are setting up your systems and your processes on campus and making sure that everyone knows where those systems are. There's documentation for that, so you can point to those things, and so there are no surprises for people. And so, again, it's not just about compliance and the reasons why we have good documentation is because it really actually preserves institutional knowledge. So you can see kind of historically how you have kind of managed this particular situation or process with students, but also ensures continuity when staff changes. So if you've got turnover in your student life office or you have turnover with your class deans or whomever, you can see how things were done in the past and there's not kind of just flying blind or reinventing the wheel every time. But I think even more important than that, it gives you a full picture of the student. So you can see kind of over time how a student has been experiencing the school, what's been happening with them, what's been going on, what happened with them in ninth grade, what happened with them in 11th grade, and see that information over time, which could really help in context when you're dealing with a particular student. And then lastly, but not least, it provides everyone on the team or everyone who has access to that documentation with the context that they need so that everyone is speaking the same language, they know kind of what's going on with this student, and there's no kind of surprises or blind spots for everyone that's involved. And that also can help when you're having conversations with parents so that you feel like you've got full information and you can speak to the parents intelligently. And so I also want to say, as I'm running through these slides, if there are questions that you have, if you have comments or concerns, feel free to put those in the chat. We are monitoring that so that we can answer questions in real time. So again, I call it the C word, consistency, super important. You want to think about that in everything that you're doing on your school's campuses. Because again, we talked about being protected legally and operationally when you are consistent with your policies and your procedures. And also, when you're consistent, an added benefit of that is that it builds trust with students, with families, with faculty and staff. And so that creates that psychological safety, is a term that I like to use, so that when things happen on your campus, kids know, families know, everyone knows kind of what the next steps are. There are no surprises. They know that there are consequences that will happen. They know that they might not be the same for everyone, but they've built that trust, or you've given that benefit of the doubt that students and family and the community at large knows that you are operating for the good of the community. And in the best interest of the individual as well. And so what happens sometimes when we are not consistent is that people don't know whether, what are the priorities, what are the competing interests, or what kind of rises to the top in terms of importance when decisions are being made. And so, again, talking about that, students receiving stable and predictable support, so important. When students feel that sense of stability, it really kind of minimizes poor behavior, it minimizes anxiety, and helps people just have a better experience overall. So again, consistency equals fairness plus continuity and accountability, because it keeps everyone honest about how we're following up. What are we doing? What we say we're going to do, and that makes sure that we are being fair, and there's that continuity that everyone needs on their school campuses, so that you are not kind of running into those legal or being perceived as being unfair. So we want to talk a little bit about, the shift to restorative that we've been seeing in schools recently. I actually recently just wrapped up my master's in restorative practices, so this is something that's been super interesting to me. When I was a dean of students, I wish I had these tools and this language to use. I was doing some of this stuff, but I didn't really know that this was kind of what restorative practices was about. And so, when you think about your traditional approach to discipline, it's very focused on kind of outcomes, right? And so you're thinking about kind of checking the box off the list. There is an incident, and then now there's a consequence that's associated with that. And that's, in some ways pretty efficient, right? And so you want to make sure that you are kind of doing the things that you say you're going to do. You're kind of being true to your handbook and all those things. But also sometimes it really feels like with a traditional approach that it's an emphasis on punishment over kind of the context in which things are happening with students. And so, with this documentation process and with having a system where you can see all these things, you can see the context of the student, which is so important when you're thinking about holistically the life of a student on campus. And so, now that we're shifting to this restorative approach, it's more student-centered. You're thinking about the why, like how we get to how or why a student made the decision that they made. And we want to focus a little bit more on growth, repair, and support of that student. But I do want to just kind of highlight this, because I do sometimes get this from folks that, people think that the restorative approach is about avoiding consequences. It's not at all. It's really about increasing accountability to the school community in a way that is, appropriate for the incident, right? And so thinking about it in that way can really kind of shift, I think, people's thinking about why we want to move to a more restorative method. Some people also think that restorative kind of takes too much time, and it's just, I don't have time to kind of now sit down with students and have these sorts of conversations. But if you think of it this way, if you kind of front load kind of what you're doing and think about kind of how students are making decisions of what's happening in the community, that reduces the likelihood of repeat offenses, because you don't want reoccurrence. You want to build these relationships, and that's the one thing I also want to kind of put a star by. It's really about building relationships, and it's making students feel like they're connected in the community, that they're seen, that they're heard, that they belong, and that they matter on these campuses, so that when incidents happen on your campus, you can hold students accountable while still keeping them connected to the community. So, thinking about why this shift matters in terms of restorative practices, better long-term student outcomes. Students are less likely to kind of repeat the same offenses. They are more likely to uh, kind of have just better behavior in general. And then you think about stronger school culture. If students are understanding what the values and how important relationships and community is within the school, then they're less likely to have these sort of infractions. And then more equitable practices. You want to think about equity when you're talking about how you are managing your student process and treating everyone the same. And so you want to make sure that in all these instances that you are having conversations with students, knowing about kind of the contributing factors that would lead them to make certain decisions, and helping them, one, either be more connected in the community, or get them the support that they need so that they are making better decisions.
And then also, Bridget, I can jump in when we have.
Yeah, please do. Absolutely. I feel like I'm like monologue here, so go right ahead.
We had a quick poll just to get a sense of, where your schools are at in this journey. So I'll go ahead and start that there. I think you all should be able to fill that out. Just asking, where are you in this journey? Have you started thinking about it? Are you wanting to sort of put it into practice, but not quite sure where to start? I see the votes coming in. And I'll add it here so everyone can see.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh, I can't see. There we go.
Yeah, this is, the next thing we're just going to talk about is why this is hard. This is really hard to do. It's, there's a reason, this is a difficult process. It's a difficult system. So, yeah, you're not alone.
That is right. You are not alone. Absolutely.
But, not quite sure where to start. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone who voted. So let me get this off the screen. But yeah, if that poll showed anything, I think, a lot of people are in that same boat where they're trying to put a more restorative approach into practice, but the tools just aren't quite there to make it easy. So I'll hand it back to you, Bridget, to talk a little bit about, why this is difficult.
Absolutely. And so I think, one of the things, or one of the reasons why this can feel like a kind of a monumental or even an insurmountable task is as we think of it as we have to do all of these things all at once, right? We have to kind of blow up our system and make it more restorative. And, what I tell people when I'm doing this work with them in schools is that, you can really move the needle with just some small steps, because at the end of the day, the real work in terms of being more restorative is building relationships. And so, how are you building relationships on your school campus? And not just with the students, and not it starts with the adults. And so, you want to think about how the adults are relating to each other, how they're modeling the behavior that we want the students to have. And so, starting there, thinking about how to be more relational, and thinking about what we can do, is that whether in faculty meetings, spend a little bit more time getting to know each other, whether it's thinking about how you address students by name and knowing a little bit about them, what happens in our advisory time together. There are lots of low-hanging fruit in different ways that people can think about being more relational. And so if there's one thing that you take away from this webinar today, other than that the August Schools platform is great, is that this relational work does take time. It is not something that can be done overnight. Sometimes you feel like you're taking two steps forward and one step back, and all of those things are okay. But staying the course is what's really important. And so I want to talk a little bit more about some other reasons why schools struggle to do this. Is because they only it's fragmented, and so only approaching schools talk about wanting to be restorative in their discipline practice or in their discipline system. And so being fragmented or segmenting like that is not a sustainable model. And so you want to think about, again, just those little touches that I talked about a few minutes ago about how the entire community can be restorative, because you want to think about what you're restoring to. And so if people don't understand that, it makes it really hard to kind of move in this direction, especially because the traditional practices are just, we've been doing them so long, it's comfortable, it's easy, and we know how to do those things. And sometimes we need a little bit more help in thinking about, kind of how to ask the right questions and how to be a little bit more patient, how to take a little bit more time in dealing with some of these incidences instead of just saying, first of all, sometimes we make assumptions about what has happened and why it's happened. And other times we miss the connection part before we correct a student. And so if you've ever been in a room with me when I'm doing training, I always use the term connection before correction. And so that's really kind of the basis of restorative practices and building relationships. The last thing I want to say when talking about kind of what happens and why we struggle to do this is because, our school campuses move really fast. And so, we are in that kind of traditional lane where we've identified the infraction, we've given the consequence, we kind of checked that box and moved on, but we don't follow up. And that's the other piece that's important and relational when you're thinking about restorative practices, is that we need to kind of follow through. We need to close that loop, circle back around, and not just initially after the incident, but a couple of months down the road, because we want to make sure that the students are connected to the community. We want to make sure they're thinking about um, how they will do things differently moving forward so they're not repeating the same offense. And so, again, carving out that time I know can be difficult, but um, thinking about front loading and doing these things so that you're not spending a lot of time with a lot of students coming through your process. And so the point, the last bullet there, the last sentence there on the screen is that, even well-intentioned schools can fall back into reactive discipline because it's just easy and comfortable, and no one's gonna to knock you for that. But I also want to say, even before we get into the demo that Victoria is going to do for us, you can I mentioned earlier that restorative practice is not the absence of consequences. So you don't have to feel like either I'm going down the consequence route or the restorative route. Those two lanes can converge, and they should converge, because you want a little bit of both of those when the incident asks for, or you need it for a particular situation. So don't feel like you have to do either or. It should be a both and. So with that said, I will turn it over to Victoria so she can show us how it works in practice.
Amazing. All righty. Okay, so let me click add here. And okay. Good to go. You can see the screen?
Yep, we can see the screen.
Okay, perfect. So I know we've got a mix of schools here on this webinar who are, August, they use August every day, and people who may be completely new to August and aren't familiar with how this all works. So I'll just give like a real quick recap of sort of broadly how August works. And so you'll see here, this is our demo site, and this is all fake student data. These are not real kids. And so we pull in all your students from your student information system. So we integrate with Blackbaud, Veracross, PowerSchool, basically any student information system. And so all of this demographic information pulls in from the student information system. So it'll recognize all of this. And then you can open a new encounter, which is how we refer to sort of, if you think about it as sort of like a meeting note, an encounter with a student. And so you'll see right now I'm logged in as a dean. So I'm a dean at this school, and we have lots of different templates here that we've built out with Bridget to make it really easy to document those interactions with, whether it's a student meeting, a faculty consult, a guardian consult, restorative conversations, restorative written agreements, reentry meetings, conduct committee meetings, all sorts of behavior. We have templates ready to go, built out, ready to use, incident reports. And what I love to highlight is also shout outs. I think so much of when we talk about behavior, it's negative stuff that's going on. This kid said something inappropriate, and now we're talking to the student, but I think also making sure that we're logging, we're documenting when things go really well, that a student has made a really great stride, they've grown, they've improved in a skill that they were struggling with last year. So there's also, I always like to highlight the little shout out template. So for those of you who are familiar with August, you'll see that these are all new encounter templates that we've been working on that we're really excited for you all to start using. And so the flow that I'll show here today also leverages something new that we've been working on to allow teachers to refer students to the dean, the counselor, any other sort of users of the August platform. And so I have one teed up here ready to go. So the teacher, you can see, you'll scroll down, you'll see referrals here. Quinn Garrett, an English teacher, submitted this incident report to me about Blake Adams. So I'll come in here and I'll accept this referral. So when I accept it, it just opens it up for me. It pops open what the teacher filled out, so I can see, okay, so it occurred today around noon in English class. It was reported by this other student. It was, okay, so it was an issue here. Blake commented on Emily's Instagram post using inappropriate language. And it looks like the teacher's gathering a screenshot of the comment. So really the important piece here is just documenting what's going on and making sure that we have all the information and context we need. So now that I've gotten this incident report, as the dean, sort of in the old way of doing things, I would have had to go email a bunch of people, track down a bunch of people to figure out, okay, what's going on with Blake? Is there something else going on? But what's nice about using August is that I can just come in here and I can pop open Blake's, what we call a student card, which is where you can see all the information about Blake. And so I'll scroll down here and I'll click on the Encounters tab. And this shows me what encounters Blake has recently had with other people on our team. So the beauty of it is that as the dean, I can see that Blake, for example, has been meeting with the counselor, he's been meeting with the learning specialist, but I can't actually see those confidential notes. So it gives me the context I need without sacrificing the student's data privacy and the confidentiality of the counseling notes. And so clearly I'm looking at Blake's sort of history and context here, and I can see, okay, he's been meeting with the counselor, he's been meeting with the learning specialist. There's something deeper going on. There's more to this story than just this one sort of incident that came in. So now that I have that context, I'll come in here and I will first add the checklist. I'm really excited about this. This is something that Bridget worked really closely with us on. Basically, every school has their own unique process of doing things, but our goal here is to sort of give you a starting point that makes it really easy to then customize from there. So you'll see all these templates that I'll show today are all customizable. So, your school, whether it's, the unique verbiage or the unique step-by-step that you have, that all can be incorporated. So here you'll see this is just sort of a nice reference checklist of what I'm going to do in this scenario. So first, meet with the student regarding the reported incident. So check, meet with the student, notify advisor. So that's where, we always want to make sure that people are looped in with the correct amount of information. So, we don't want to overshare. We don't want to undershare. We want to make sure that people have the right amount. So what I can actually do here is I can come in here and I can share this documentation with the advisor, because I want the advisor to be very looped in on this situation. I want them to know what's going on. So I can click here and it'll pull up who the related faculty for Blake are. So I can choose his advisor right from there, Luca, and then I can send an email alerting Luca that they can go view this encounter in the portal.
So Victoria, before you move forward, there was a question in the chat about how do you do the customization for the process checklists? So how would that work for schools if they wanted to customize it?
Yes, definitely. So this can actually be customized in August. So you can go in, we have, it's a form builder where you can add different checklists. You can change the checklist items. You can add new items. You can add like a new field. Let's say I wanted to add another field here in terms of assess impact. You can customize all of this right in the platform. So yes, happy to elaborate more, but I feel like I could do a whole nother webinar on how to customize the templates in here. Okay, cool. So, okay, I notified the advisor, shared that with them. Great. And then I actually just saw that the teacher had sent the screenshot to me of the incident. And so for making sure that we're sort of staying compliant and gathering evidence and all that, we want to make sure I can actually attach this right here. And so I can pull in that screenshot of the Instagram comment, and I can actually attach it right here in the encounter. So this sort of helps you walk through the situation, make sure that everything's getting documented consistently and properly. And I love what Bridget said about sort of having a consistent process protects you, builds trust with the students, builds trust with family. And so I sort of think of the documentation as sort of giving a structure to the process so that it makes sure that you're hitting all those things as you go through. And so then, filling this out. And one thing I wanted to highlight here, we talked about sort of this restorative approach and how, let me get back here, how the restorative approach is often working sort of in parallel with maybe sort of a more so let's select restorative process, and you'll see that like the new restorative process checklist comes up, but often also there is a sort of a more formal hearing process working in parallel. And so you can select both of those and have both at the same time. So the both and that Bridget was talking about to show how that all works. So we have this restorative suitability check built in because the student has to sort of be willing to participate in a restorative process. That's sort of the core of how the restorative process works. And so in order to sort of start the restorative process, you really have to meet all of these checklist items. So you'll see once we check those, then the restorative participation checklists appeared. So it's really meant to sort of guide you through that process. And so you can check all these off. You'll see we have different checkpoints for the restorative meeting, restorative agreement. And so I'll show you how we're sort of building this almost like a case file for this incident. So the next thing I'll do, I just want to make sure I don't miss anything, is I'm going to message the parent asking to call them. So one of my favorite things about the August platform is that you can text parents right from here. So you're not having to use your personal phone. And so I'll come in here to messages and I'll create a new message thread. And this will automatically show me Blake's guardians. So you see Ben parent is a parent. And so I can just message, I'll choose SMS because I'm wanting to text the parent, and I'll say, hi, Ben, do you have some time this afternoon for a call? And then I can hit send. If it's a English as a second language families, there are lots of translation options here. So I'll go ahead and I'll click send. And then I can wait for that response. Oop. Oh, I got clicked out. And I can make sure that I'm scheduling a time with Blake's parent to talk about what happened. So let's say that Blake's parent got back to me. We have our call. I want to make sure that I'm logging the fact that I talked to the parent, just for that, that consistency, that documentation, making sure that everything's getting recorded. And so, I could say, chatted with Ben over the phone. He's going to discuss what happened with Blake as well. And then you can log that it was a phone call. So you'll see we're starting to sort of build up this process piece by piece. And so when I go back to the student conduct process checklist, you'll see, okay, I had sort of a pre-meeting with the parent guardian here. And so next thing I'll want to add in here is this restorative conversation note. So this is really just meant to be sort of a guiding note for the process of this restorative conversation, while still allowing for the flexibility of handling this in whichever way you want to handle it. So we have lots of restorative methods here to choose from. You'll see all these expand out. Maybe you're having sort of a perspective sharing conversation, maybe also a goal setting conversation, and then you can summarize what did you talk about in this meeting. Maybe Blake shared like some insecurities that were sort of manifesting in the way that he acted out. You can which issues you talked about. Maybe it was the sort of the identity-based harm component. And so really just helps you log so you have this documentation of what you talked about. And then an important piece of the sort of restorative approach is this written agreement that, the restorative approach, the goal is to not just log the incident, give a punishment, and then everyone moves on. But the goal is to repair the harm that was done and then, follow up, move on, repair the harm, and rebuild sort of that relationship with the community. So in here, we also have a restorative written agreement template that can outline the repair actions. So, maybe Blake is going to write an apology letter to Emily. Any sort of behavioral expectations we have coming out of this agreement. And then we can mark sort of the next check-in date. So when are we going to revisit this? When are we going to come back to it? And then you can have actually both students sign here. So both students are part of this agreement. So just showing a little bit of how this all works, you can sort of use these notes, customize them as you want, but we really wanted to sort of build something out of the box just to get started and to give you something to work off of to start a more restorative process. And then, just to touch on what Bridget was saying, often there's sort of a more formal conduct process happening at the same time. So that's why we have these, templates here as well, so that all of this can sort of work together to make sure that that information is being captured. So now you'll see I'll close out this note. And then when I go into you'll see this new encounter. So, let's say a week from now, I'm trying to remember something, did I call that parent? Which parent did I talk to? I can just come in here, open this back up, and I have all of this history to reference. So just a little bit of, quick demo of how it all works. Happy to answer any questions people have. I know this is a lot. And so if you're already using August, I know a lot of this probably feels familiar to you. But for those of you who aren't, we're happy to answer any questions you may have.